Diba official site, Xilaoqi and President Rabbit are influential accounts on Chinese social media, Weibo. A while ago, Japanese economic news tied these Wei media to many Chinese media, calling them militia fighting online under the so-called elaborate planning of the Chinese government. Nikkei claimed that these Wei media accounts and Chinese accounts are secretly contacted, stir up chaos online, such as COVID-19 origin tracing and Pelosi's Taiwan saga. Among the authors of this article are 3 ethnic Chinese journalists, all of whom grew up in China. One of the 3 authors published a negative article on the Chinese government's governance of riots in Hong Kong during her internship at Reuters and served as a key member of a Reuters award-winning project for China-related political reporting. She then received a $100,000 scholarship to Columbia University, sponsored by Nikkei. The other 2 authors have similar experiences. For some reason, they were chosen by some Western media to become anti-China media activists, attacking China, providing financial support to Chinese students, training them to become anti-China writers is not exclusive to Japanese media. It has long become a common trick in some Western media organizations. The money used to finance Chinese students by Western anti-China media, where does it come from? In August 2021, Danish scholar Jan Oberg published a 132-page academic article, Behind the Smokescreen. The document mentioned that the United States plans to spend $1.5 billion to train media and journalists from various countries to compile negative stories about China in the next 5 years.
The US sets off $1,500 million, that's $1.5 billion, the next 5 years, to support education, training courses, whatever, for media people to write negative stories about China.
In April 2021, the United States passed the so-called Strategic Competition Act of 2021 regarding China as its biggest competitor globally, and it proposes to appropriate $300 million for each of fiscal years 2022 through 2026 to counter the malign influence of the Chinese Communist Party globally. Some of the $300 million will be provided to independent media and so-called third-party civil society groups to report anti-China stories and spread negative news about China's Belt and Road Initiative. Some anti-China media that claim to be independent are funded by the U.S. government. Grants are used not only to fabricate false stories themselves, but also to train authors to write false reports. Strategic Competition Act of 2021, page 67, also proposes to appropriate $100 million per fiscal year and to be carried out by the United States Agency of Global Media. The United States Agency of Global Media is responsible for managing global broadcasting activities of U.S. foreign propaganda. Voice of America and Radio Free Asia, among others, are affiliated to it. How the $100 million will be spent, the Strategic Competition Act of 2021, is also clearly written. Voice of America shall establish a real-time disinformation tracking tool similar to Polygraph for Russian language propaganda and misinformation. USAGM shall expand existing training and partnership programs that promote journalistic standards, investigative reporting, cybersecurity, and digital analytics to help expose and counter false CCP narratives. And USAGM shall increase funding for RFA's Mandarin, Tibetan, Uyghur, and Cantonese language services, the bill reads. Through the United States Agency of Global Media, the U.S. government provides financial support to anti-China media such as Voice of America and Free Asia Radio to crack down on so-called false narratives and make a big fuss about ethnic issues such as Xinjiang and Tibet. As early as 2017, the National Endowment for Democracy began funding the so-called Students for a Free Tibet, providing funds to strengthen their skills in media advocacy, communications, and technology. Meanwhile, the U.S. National Endowment for Democracy has long funded the so-called the Foundation Voice of Tibet to set up so-called independent shortwave Tibetan radio, disseminating information about Tibet independence. This is just the tip of the iceberg of projects funded by the National Endowment for Democracy. The funding project forms a complete chain. Use media tools to concoct and disseminate false content. Find young people who have been brainwashed by misinformation, then train them to become vanguard thugs of anti-China forces. All kinds of criticism and false reports on China on the internet have the figure of the U.S. government behind them. Using funds provided by the U.S. government, anti-China media has injected U.S. government ideology on topics such as ethnic minorities, women's rights and minority rights, and spread extreme values. The purpose of the anti-China media is to use distorted values to portray China as an authoritarian state that is authoritarian and assertive. The so-called authoritarian image is opposed to the so-called democratic image that the United States has packaged for itself. Through the confrontation of two images, the U.S. government wants to achieve two goals. One is to divide Chinese society, hype marginal topics to dissolve social consensus, divide and win over a very small number of individual groups, and fabricate information to reduce the centripetal force of the people on China's current development. The second is to whitewash the true face of the United States internally, cover up the real problems of American society, establish a glorious image of its own democracy and freedom externally, and safeguard its global interests.
Everybody, there is a massive problem happening inside the United States, and it is the result of Western media consistently demonizing and constantly brainwashing Americans and telling us that China is the greatest threat to America.
Whether it is the United States Agency of Global Media or the U.S. National Endowment for Democracy, the root of the evil is the U.S. government. By appropriating funds to subordinate agencies and funding non-governmental organizations, the U.S. government sends money to anti-China media and non-governmental organizations, brainwashes Chinese youth, and then selects people with anti-China tendencies to go through focal training so that they can become staunch anti-China activists. The United States uses the method of use Chinese to contain China to carry out cognitive warfare, allowing some Chinese to become public opinion tools. But the U.S.'s criminal behavior will inevitably backfire in the long run.
美国一贯标榜新闻自由，但世人看到的却是本应作为大众获取和分享信息的社交媒体平台，成了美国政客散布虚假信息、操纵国际舆论的工具，成了美国对他国肆意污名化、妖魔化的武器。从冷战时期发起知更鸟计划，收买媒体操纵舆论，到新世纪借洗衣粉白头盔对伊拉克、叙利亚发动战争，再到编造世纪谎言污蔑中国治疆政策。事实一再证明，美国既是最大的虚假信息散布者，也是最大的新闻自由双标持有者。